We were saying how very important it is to bring about in the human mind the radical revolution. The crisis is a crisis in consciousness, a crisis that cannot anymore accept the old norms, the old patterns, the ancient traditions. And considering what the world is now, with all their misery, conflict, destructive brutality, aggression, and so on, man is still as he was. He's still brutal, violent, aggressive, acquisitive, competitive, and he has built a society along these lines.
If I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
People are part of the Satanic Church and they are worshiping Satan through abortion and like the whole abortion agenda. That's crazy to even be saying.
Before they used to do witch hunts and burning at the stake. Now, they're doing it little by little, taking away reproductive rights. So it is our duty to worship through activism. That is the key to the Satanic Temple, what differentiates us from other Satanists.
So I know what you're probably thinking. You're thinking, well, she's not really really into like satanic worship. She's not like actually really like for real a Satanist, right? I mean, actually, Satan?
Right here, right now, we're standing up for tyranny, we're standing up for women's rights, LGBT rights, for everybody's rights.
Let us embrace the Luciferian impulse to eat of the tree of knowledge.
To invoke Satan is to reach out without reservation and to eat from the tree of knowledge.
Blasphemy for the sake of blasphemy! Hail Satan.
Hail Satan! Hail Satan!
It really is amazing to think about. Man, this is the kind of thing that you would like read about in the history in the Bible. You have a satanic priestess, part of the Satanic Temple, that's involved in propagating abortion. That's part of making sure that culture embraces this, and she does it as a part of her worship, as a part of her religion. That this is like, in a sense, blood sacrifice of children, and it's overt, it's out there, it's on her sleeves. And it really, we're finding, isn't uncommon to find people who are a part of the Satanic Temple or involved in active satanic worship to be avid Planned Parenthood supporters and activists. As a matter of fact, our local death escort, the person who actually encourages the women coming in for the abortion and escorts them to the front door, offers solace and encouragement, our local death escort is also involved in satanic worship. This is an Instagram photo of her offering supposedly a blood sacrifice, and that was actually the satanic cross. And this is a pentagram. And here is her with a picture that says, "Destroy your life for Satan." And this is an interesting picture with some abortion tools and a baby in a jar. And the first thing that pops up when you put her name into Google is her active engagement in forums for Satan. I can't believe I'm actually saying this. Is this really happening right now? So the thing is abortion is fundamentally religious. Some people engage in abortions for peace. They offer their child as a sacrifice to get peace. Some people, obviously, Satanists, may even engage in abortion and the propagation of the message of abortion to actually practice Satanism and be involved in satanic worship.
People in colleges, professors in colleges, to do things like, I don't know, redefine the biological reality of gender and pretend it doesn't exist. This has long-term ramifications that I don't think we're thinking through. And most people sort of in our world are like, it's crazy, but it'll go away. It won't go away. If your children grow up learning that there's no actual distinction between men and women, what does that mean long-term?
The hips on the drag.
A drag diva duo known as the Shear Sisters will be reading to the kids on June 19th as part of the library celebrating LGBT Pride Month.
Library story time for little kids, not exactly where you'd expect to find controversy, but a plan to have drag queens tell stories at a Cherry Hill library has people talking.
This one is called Worm Loves Worm.
Talking, singing, and reading.
We can both be grooms.
To an audience of preschoolers, toddlers, and their caregivers.
Well, story time at the Millennium Library today was led by drag queens.
These words make her little sister very sad, and she starts to cry. That is so not nice.
So when the head of a prestigious North London school announced this week that he's consulting pupils and parents about a gender-neutral uniform, allowing all pupils to choose trousers or skirts, it sounded like progress to me.
In fact, it's a national thing.
Who wants to be a drag queen when they grow up?
But yeah, this is sort of a new thing that's happening, popping up in public libraries across the fruited plain, and it's actually happening in my neighborhood library in Brooklyn.
But we all benefit from living in a society which leaves behind the oppressive, strict gender norms of the past and recognizes that gender can be fluid and ever-changing.
Of your argument is that we should all be a bit relaxed about gender and accept that now in this day and age your identified gender does not necessarily match your physical characteristics.
Because again, this is all for the sake of inclusivity and diversity.
Sure.
This. And so I asked, I said, well, what about ministers? Would you allow a minister to come in and read a Bible story for Storybook Hour? And they said, no, they would not do that.
And sometimes it just seems things are a little out of balance on these, doesn't it?
Macho men under attack at college campuses across the country, now encouraging men to be less manly with courses to fight toxic masculinity.
Well, on a day meant to honor our fallen heroes, one website, Vox.com, instead was smearing our Marines as fraternity members with a toxic masculinity problem.
As my friend Matt Walsh wrote on Twitter, call me crazy, but I'm pretty sure the Marine Corps is supposed to be both masculine and toxic. But these are the kind of people who want our Marines to prance around into battle wearing high heels and camo rompers.
It's 5:26. You're taking a live look at Boise from the Red Lion Hotel. Rompers have become a staple in women's fashion. The cute one-piece outfit, one of my favorites. But what about rompers for men?
No.
These images and video of grown men in the patterned onesies are blowing up social media.
It's a one-piece garment like women and babies wear. Men, why would you ever want to engage in this?
This is ridiculous. What
the baby version?
What grown man's going to wear this?
You wear that out in public?
You wear it out in public.
Okay.
Stuart Ledbetter joins us with a look at what else is ahead in the next half hour. Hi, Stu.
I still can't get over that Romkin thing. It's just wrong.
I got a friend with a daughter at an American university, a daughter who's rooming with another woman who has a... And that is completely understood, that is fine. And he, as a father, finds that a bit strange, but this is where we are.
This story has gone viral. Vinny, 23 years of age, has already spent tens of thousands of dollars. Why? In hopes to transform into a genderless alien.
All right, in a society that values youth and beauty, getting cosmetic procedures is nothing new.
But there are some who take it to the extreme.
Now, our next guest is on a mission to have the perfect physique.
Like the man who's known as the human Ken doll.
I'm known in the media as the human Ken doll. I've spent $170,000 on 152 cosmetic procedures. I think I look amazing. It's always exciting to see what new modifications people have come up with to sort of engineer themselves to look like what society would say would be the typical ideal.
You look very different, so we have to ask why you've done it.
Justin recently met the real-life Barbie, 21-year-old Valerie Lakhanova from Russia.
Right.
And there are a few things that need to be fixed. There is an ongoing process to look good. And now we live in a very demand society.
Yes.
And I'd like to be the best that I can possibly, my body can allow me to be.
Just the availability and the control to be able to manipulate my body and change it, to sculpt it, I guess, became a form of art for me.
Okay. So we have a lot of fun kind of working through our binary categories. So welcome to my world, where nothing makes sense anymore.
So this is the subject now. There are 650,000 transgender people in this country. That accounts for 1% of the population. Of that 1%, the minutest amount of number are children. And to change our schools, to change the landscape of this country for a handful of people when there is no proof that we need to do that, I find astonishing.
And people are using this as an identifier. As much as you might call yourself a man or a woman, kids are saying, I'm agender.
Let kids develop, let them, leave them to their own devices and let them be what they need to be. I think this is terrifying. I think it's dangerous because we could be pushing kids into a gender corridor where they're told it doesn't matter whether you're a man or woman, it doesn't matter what you are.
Before I bring the rest of you in.
The other thing that's kind of fun about this field is it is the most deconstructionist thing I've ever run into. If you want a field where it's just, you're never going to get your head wrapped around everything, this is it.
More into a gender non-binary.
So you want to be sexless?
Yeah, I looked into removing my genitals completely with different doctors, like a sexual on assignment.
People are curious. People want to know what's going on. When somebody is assigned male, and that's the way the lingo works in my world, you are assigned a sex at birth. When you're assigned male at birth, but you grow up, and this is not what we're thinking of as male.
But my concern is the extraordinary increase in figures, that the attitude that people like you perhaps, without realising, are fostering. Let me run you through some of the figures. The number of under-18s referred to that service in 2016 to 2017 was 2,016. Okay? The number of under-18s referred in 2009-2010 was 97. Now, although I'm quite good at maths, I haven't got Diane Abbott here with me to work out what percentage that is, but that's quite an uptick.
Okay, so here we are now watching development collide with something, you know, when we see adults, we sort of, I think to some extent we go, okay, that's okay, you can do what you want, even if I'm uncomfortable, it's still you, you're all grown up, whatever. What about a 12-year-old? Now back it up, what about an 8-year-old?
Here's the breakdown. 21, for 2016, 2017, 21 were 5-year-olds, 9 were 4-year-olds, and 1 was a 3-year-old.
I'm going to keep backing it up. I have children as young as 3 that come into my office with their families, where the family question is, Junior here is saying that they are a gender that I don't think of them as. What should I do? 3.
So we need you, but when you have a 3-year-old embarking on possibly gender identity issues, well, you're a mum, I mean, it is utter coppers, to choose an unfortunate word. It is utterly wrong.
This is different. You go through gender assignment, reassignment. I mean, removing your Adam's apple, feminizing your face, or making it more masculine. Removing breasts, adding breasts, genitalia. But when you get into removing nipples and belly buttons, that's sort of
and trying to remove any genitalia at all, it's such a this is different. You know,
that's the part of the reason why you'll see my topic area here says gender re/evolution, because for me this is, are we talking about evolution? Are we talking about a revolution? What is this?
97 to 2000.
Is that because it wasn't acceptable to be referred, and it is now, or is it because actually somehow we've put another phenomena into society and said, yeah, this is okay?
Yeah. But this is like brain-busting material for a lot of us, because this is not how we understand the world, and so it is a huge shift.
Remember, sex is usually between your legs. Gender is between your ears, right?
Amen.
It's rooted in the brain.
Yes, thank you.
But the brain is also very, very complex, and we have to see what is this really about.
And now we know that we can actually do what's called gene drive. But if you're messing with bacteria, if you're messing with rapidly reproducing microorganisms or even insects and so on, why, you could totally alter evolution now. And do it
in one generation.
In one generation, or certainly in a matter of weeks to months or years, depending on if you release it into nature.
And completely destroy natural processes and food chains and other things as well.
Some call this directed evolution.
Designer babies. Do you want a boy? You want a girl? Now you can order up. We found more Colorado parents are making that controversial choice.
And more doctors are offering it, using technology to guarantee you get the gender you want.
Researchers have succeeded in creating 5 new synthetic yeast chromosomes, the fundamental building blocks of all living organisms.
Pai nosso que está no céu, santificado seja o vosso nome. Venha a nós o vosso reino. Seja feita a vossa vontade. Assim na terra como no céu. O pão nosso cada dia nos dai hoje. Perdoa as nossas ofensas, assim como nós perdoamos os nossos pecadores. Não nos deixei cair em tentação, mas livrai do mal. Amém. Você não é poderoso. Você não é poderoso. Jesus, Deus está aqui. Deus é maior do que tudo. Você não é poderoso. Deus é maior. Jesus Cristo está aqui. Conhece a Bíblia melhor do que você. Conhece. Você é político. Sou político. Vou te falar que você não é. Não vou te bater, não vou deixar. Não deixa o seu nível. Você é do mal. Você não é. Você é do mal. Sai! Isso! Sai! Qual o santo que tá aí? Qual o santo que tá aí? Fala aí! Lúcifer! 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 Tá incorporado com o santo, né? Tu tá incorporado com o santo, né? Quero ver se o santo vai segurar a tua vida isso. Bate! Quero ver! Não vou te bater não, porque Deus é maior. Meu cavalo estava inocente, estava trabalhando. Meu cavalo, eu trouxe meu cavalo até aqui. Eu não vou fazer nada com vocês. Só não quero que encoste no meu cavalo. Deus é maior. Inocente. Ele é inocente.
homes, planes, cars, the way we produce our food, the way we build our cities, almost everything we do releases carbon dioxide, CO2. And that leads to climate change. The polar ice caps will melt, the seas will start to rise, there'll be more dangerous weather patterns, floods, droughts, wildfires. It sounded like some nightmarish science fiction film.
As Jesus was in Jerusalem, he prophesied that the holy temple in the city, the most revered structure in the entire nation, would be utterly destroyed, and that no two stones would lay upon another. Not unlike expected reactions today, many people were believed to be greatly angered by this warning.
Some of the people that would not have believed the prophecy, in fact were greatly angered by it, would have been members of the Sanhedrin, namely the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. Their anger is very, very evident about such things. Look at this huge temple complex, 35 acres. The temple itself being 160 feet tall. The whole outside of the complex itself, as Josephus described it, looking like a mountain of snow, colonnaded on all sides by 60-foot high columns, built like a massive fortress. And they look at this and they say, well, what do you mean not one of these stones is going to end up upon another? They were incredulous.
In fact, along with the destruction of the Jews' holy temple, Jesus foretold that the nation of Israel would fall and the people would be scattered to the ends of the earth.
Which indicates in that prophecy that Israel will have been so utterly obliterated in history at some point in their future history that it would seem like they could never possibly live again.
37 years later, the prophecy was fulfilled in the greatest of detail.
Pompey came into this area, the Roman general, and saw the significance of where we are right now. That land bridge between two mighty empires, Mesopotamia and Egypt, the crossroads of civilization. It was a trade route that connected three continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. And later on, that trade route was well known to be one of the most important trade routes in the world, the Via Maris. People then knew that if you controlled this trade route, you controlled commerce. And if you controlled commerce, you controlled money. And if you had money, you had power. In the year 68, during the holidays, actually Passover, many of the Jewish believers from around the world who came to pray and pay homage and come to visit the temple were actually stuck inside the walls when the Romans began to besiege it. The Romans built a siege wall around the city so no one will escape. The fighting in Jerusalem lasted for 2 years. In August of the year 70, the Romans managed to breach the walls. They destroyed the temple, burning it down to its foundation. Over 1 million people died trying to defend the city of Jerusalem.
And if you go to the Temple Mount now, you can look down from the original Temple Mount where those stones that Jesus predicted would be thrown down are all laying down on the original pavement, the original layer, the street where Jesus actually walked.
Every detail of the prophecy came to pass just as Jesus foretold. Additional prophetic details found in the ancient book of Ezekiel, recorded long before the fall of Israel in 70 AD, describes Israel as becoming so utterly destroyed, the future state of the nation is described as a valley of dry bones, a nation that will be dead to the world. But the prophecy continues. Israel would be later brought back to life, and the surviving Jews within the world would be regathered into their land. Seemingly optimistic scripture that was recorded even before the fall of Israel took place, and yet rationalism would suggest that this ancient prophecy could never be fulfilled.
Nowhere else in history were a people who were scattered, disassembled, removed from their nation, assimilated into multitudes of other nations on the face of the earth, were ever gathered back together once again in their original land and established as a recognized nation in the world.
But after 1,800 years, the impossible happened. On May 14, 1948, after the Holocaust and the end of World War II, the nation of Israel was reborn, and the Jewish people once again had a land to call home. The action was ordered by the United Nations. It was the first and only time the UN had created a state by way of a General Assembly vote.
Israel coming back as a nation, to me, is the most astonishing event in history. And there's a lot of astonishing events in history, but it's never happened before. It's never happened in the history of civilization that a nation could be completely dispersed and 1,800 years later come back together as a nation with its original national identity. This has never happened in the history of the world.
Through rational deduction, Israel should not be standing today. For a good part of the last 60 years, this tiny nation has been outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. And though conflicts with neighboring nations and Islamic extremists continue to this day, prophecy seems, at least for now, to have been fulfilled. The destruction and rebirth of Israel, survival against all odds, no doubt amazing events that some would say are stranger than fiction. But did it all happen by chance?
You only have 1 or 2 or 3 prophecies, you might be fulfilled by chance. That's a possibility. When you have, just in the first coming prophecies alone, about 50 specific prophecies, and so these prophecies are like 15 verses long, like Isaiah 52, 53. Even to fulfill every detail of that chapter purely by chance or by coincidence, to me is an impossibility.
The prophecies that were fulfilled in the Old Testament over time and history, if we were to assign that to chance, it would make fools of us all. Because the statistical probability is something that is used in everyday life. But when you talk about a statistical probability perhaps of a city that is declared a wicked city and therefore judgment is going to fall on that city, and now here's how it's going to fall, that it's going to be attacked by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, that it's going to be utterly wiped out and yet survive being wiped out. It's going to be attacked again by many nations and it will be ultimately completely destroyed, and on the site fishermen will spread their nets. Well, that's much more specific than saying the city's going to be wiped out someday. And then you find out that this prophecy is given when Babylon was just a little hick town as part of the Assyrian Empire in the south. And suddenly it grows up and a guy named Nebuchadnezzar comes along and he does attack the city. And he does wipe it out, but the people relocate to an island off the coast. And then suddenly Nebuchadnezzar, who doesn't have a navy, after 6 years of siege, backs off. Along comes Alexander over 100 years later, and he tells them to surrender. But he doesn't get any cooperation because the people are on an island. So he takes the debris, scrapes the whole site clean and throws it into the ocean, creates a causeway a half a mile out to the island, and then gets on a whole fleet of little fishing boats, sends his soldiers across and kills every last man, woman, and child on the island. Now, that's very, very specific. And considering that the prophecy in the documents that we have in the Bible says that this is the way it would happen, and then history plays it out, not all at once, but over a series of hundreds of years. How do you explain that? How do you put numbers to that and say, this was a coincidence? There are other prophecies in the Old Testament, for instance, in the book of Daniel, where we can't call them coincidence. In Daniel, one chapter alone has over 130 specific prophecies about nations and people, about invasions and wars, specific characters and intrigue. 130 prophecies that Daniel mentioned came to pass exactly. We can look at it throughout history, that during that time in that region we can name names. Phenomenal amount of detail. But again, the rational mind doesn't want to accept that. But Daniel did write it. He was quoted many times between the time that he wrote it and the time when all of those prophecies were fulfilled, and quoted by other nations that surrounded Israel, not Israel itself, which is very convenient to have other people quoting his works. And then at the end of it all came to pass.
Much of biblical prophecy is presented in a chronological fashion and builds one prophetic event upon another, often presenting a string of future events before the first event even occurs. We see this same pattern with the writing that pertains to the fall, rebirth, and modern conflicts of Israel. If only one prophetic piece of the puzzle doesn't come to pass, then the entire series of events would fall apart.
Well, looking at all of the things that we've spoken about regarding the Jewish literature and the events that have been prophesied and fulfilled, it boggles my mind to think that these things happened by chance or by coincidence. The fact that God would thousands of years ago pick a people, that these people would be scattered throughout the entire world for a couple of thousand years, and that these people would be back in a nation, that in and of itself is a phenomenal event. And the odds of that taking place are beyond reason.
Today, it would be hard to imagine what our world might be like economically, politically, and religiously in only a few decades. And yet ancient prophecy has foretold detailed events extended thousands of years into the future with unprecedented accuracy. Regardless, some scholars continue to argue that these events are not prophecies inspired by God, but are rather the fulfillment of astronomical odds.
Astronomical odds. The odds would be absolutely astronomical. When you look at the way these prophecies of the Bible come together, one on top of the other, you have only two alternatives. It's either to embrace the fact that they claim they are from God and it must be true, or that I can't believe that and I have to believe in absolutely improbable odds.
Approximately 2,500 prophecies exist within the ancient scriptures, each chronologically built upon the previous. It is estimated that 2/3 of the scriptures have now come to pass. If the fulfillment of these foreseen changes and events were provided by a higher source, then it would suggest that the remaining 1/3 of the prophecies will also come to pass. The remaining records take place during a period called the Last Days, a time foretold by Jesus Christ and recorded by over a dozen authors within the ancient scriptures. It's a time that dictates monumental change, involving every nation throughout the world. These final prophecies provide hundreds of details and specific events foretelling of an unprecedented union of world relations, beliefs, and economic systems that will give rise to a new authority with influence over all global affairs. But as soon as the world achieves this new union and declares peace and safety, mankind will be on the brink of war, an unprecedented destruction that is foretold to end 2/3 of the global population. But if this terrifying string of future events is to come to pass, when does it begin? Or has it already? According to the ancient prophetic timeline, it was foretold that the rebirth of Israel, witnessed by the world only 6 decades ago, would mark the beginning of the end, and all remaining prophecy would come to pass within a generation. As a result, hundreds of millions of people around the world believe our generation will now witness the conclusion of prophecy. Jesus Christ also foretells of natural catastrophic events that will reach every corner of the earth.
In the book of Revelation, it speaks about this time of tribulation. And it describes in more detail what Jesus prophesied in Matthew 24. It would be a time of devastation, of tribulation, like the world has never seen before. It speaks about earthquakes and famines and wars. It speaks about huge numbers of the population of the earth being wiped out by these things. A third, a fourth, over and over again, the population of the earth is whittled down during this time. And what's interesting is over the course of the disastrous things that take place, the people of that time do not turn their hearts back to God.
Throughout this short period of tribulation, there will be global war, financial collapse, disease, earthquakes, floods and earth changes unlike anything ever witnessed before. Every nation upon the earth will suffer, and billions will die. But if the events occurring today are setting the stage for this inevitable future, then why do so many reject what so many others see clearly?
Now, having examined what the scriptures say about events past, prophetically, and that which is happening currently to align with the things that the Word of God says, the question has to come to mind, why doesn't everyone see this? Why are so many going along as if there was no information available about this at all? Well, it has to come down to the fact that if you do not believe in a God who is able to foretell what is to come, if you don't believe in a God who has shown himself to be faithful in the scriptures to so many things, if you don't believe the scientific statistical information that displays that these things are genuine, they are true, the odds of them happening by chance are too great, then you should be able to embrace what it says. You should be able to have a view of the world according to what the scriptures say. But the scriptures say something else. It says during the last days, there would be a great deception that is released upon the world. There would be a blindness to many. And the eyes of the people of the world will not be able to see the things, even though they're right in front of their faces, literally. So what this comes down to is that in order to see and understand what the Bible says, requires a person to believe in the one who gave us the Bible. If you reject him, there is a blindness to that. You're looking for all kinds of other things, other ways, other ideas.
But if our world is watched over by the God from the ancient scriptures, why would he allow the world to suffer, to be destroyed? The events prophesied are not derived from God's hatred of the world, for it is written that God loves the people of the world, but is rather the inevitable outcome created through the actions of our own heart's desire and free will. The prophecies of the scriptures must come to pass, as man's heart has not and will not change.
The prophecies of the Bible, to me, make the Bible the Bible. So much of the Bible is prophetic, and so much of those prophecies are regarding the future. So many of them were made so long ago and have come to pass in the finest detail. But if the prophecies of the past came true, I can't imagine that the prophecies of our future that are made in the Bible won't come true. They must, and they must in the finest detail.
Ran around naked through this Melbourne neighborhood saying that he was God and performing lewd acts on a tree before getting tased by an officer, and tased him twice. But we're told he didn't go down. In fact, he apparently pulled the probes from his torso and went after the officer, grabbing his badge and using it as a weapon.
That guy had superhuman strength.
The 47-year-old man, Mark Mehofer, made his first court appearance today, and our Jessica Miles was in the courtroom. And Jessica, it turned out to be a pretty dramatic court appearance.
Yeah, unlike one that I have never seen, that's for sure.
Mark reveals he heard God talking to him.
And I was waiting for a phone call, and God told me to sit here and wait. The truth is, God wrote about me 2,000 years ago. He wrote about me in a book. He says that I can do whatever I want.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are learning more about the man shot after a confrontation with police over the weekend.
Donald found out last night his son was the guy police shot.
He thinks he's Jesus Christ. He is very mental.
He's been in Lakeview in the pavilion, and he tells them he's Jesus and that they're going to kill Michael, and he has to go eat with the disciples.
My heart was pounding.
Shelley Campbell was on the job at this convenience store in Starlight when a truck plowed into the front doors. She snapped this photo. Investigators say Erin Cowan was behind the wheel. The mother of Cowan, who asked not to be identified, says there is much more to this story. He has been drug-free, is in outpatient treatment, but this week she noticed changes in him.
When I last was driving him to meetings on Wednesday morning, he was imagining that he was the second coming of Christ. He was not normal.
Camden police have arrested a woman who they say ran her car into a Walmart store on purpose. The incident happened around 8:30 last night. Police say they arrived to find that Crystal Marshall had gotten out of her car and was screaming. An officer at the scene says that Marshall told him that the rapture was coming and that God told her to do it.
Showed in his work on evolution and natural selection is that we don't need to invoke any supernatural force or power to account for the development of life through time on Earth.
The ongoing processes that are observable in today's world.
Do you think it's a belief?
I think it's just fact.
I think more like facts.
There is too much evidence to ignore.
Do you think it's a belief?
No, it's science.
It's the way it happened.
It's logical.
You know, all the scientists pretty much agree with it.
It's more of a fact.
When did you start to believe?
When I started to think for myself.
When did you start believing?
When I took my first biology class.
It all started to make a lot of sense. The teacher made it very, very easy to understand.
I generally trust the scientific community.
Makes more sense than any religion or anything.
The fossils they found of all the cavemen, the Homo sapiens, the dinosaurs, it shows clear evidence.
I believe in science.
The secret origins of CERN are nefarious to the core.
Sergio Bertolucci, the science director at CERN, admits that they're trying to open a doorway to a parallel reality, and they hope that something, unknown unknowns he calls them, will come through it. And CERN was built right over Apolliacum, where the ancients believed the doorway to Abaddon and the bottomless pit exists.
Is the bottomless pit from Revelation chapter 9 about to open?
Technology today is being developed so that we can communicate with extra-dimensional entities.
The ancient conspiracy at the center of CERN's most secretive mission.
Dating is out, hookups are in. I'm speaking in great generality. I'm on some campuses, maybe some people date, but for the most part, dating is something that Grandpa did. And on college campuses today, it's a hookup culture. That is these random, rapidly forming physical interactions for which there is no further contact anticipated. Kids only see two other options on college campuses these days, which is to be a friend with benefits, which looks great on paper, and as I pointed out before, communism looks good on paper too. That never works out for anybody. Or to get joined at the hip in these rapidly developing boyfriend-girlfriend relationships. But the organizing property of college campuses is the hookup culture. And the other thing about hookups that intrigues me is it's always intoxicated. Always intoxicated. It's got to be loaded to do it. It's such a cool thing.
The hookup culture on college campuses, sex with no attachments, which some psychologists say has largely replaced dating on a lot of campuses. And while that might sound great to some, psychologists say that hooking up can be not quite as carefree as it sounds. We got together a group of college students here in our studios to talk to them. They spoke bluntly and bravely about the routine of having sex first, and then maybe you get to know each other sometime after. What they said was very revealing. Watch. Do you like this kind of lifestyle, or do you wish it was different?
I'm not happy about it. I just feel as though people are in it just for the sex, and nobody's really taking the time to get to know each other anymore. So I feel like that's pretty much dead.
So is the idea that that's not happening, that dating is dead, as Kiyama said, is that true or not true?
I agree that you might perceive it as dead. I don't think that's necessarily bad. I think sometimes we put it on a hierarchy of, oh, sex has to mean something to you, when if it doesn't and you're just want to have sex, that's okay.
Does anybody feel like they would like more romance? They would like to be courted? You're like, yes, I would. Go ahead.
I think that the romance is still there, but I think it's a little dying out right now.
Nowadays, romance is just like, hey, let's go for a coffee date. And, oh, if we hook up, we hook up.
How do you feel the next day after this happens and you see that person on campus? Are you supposed to you're supposed to just be cool about it and pretend like you don't really know each other?
If you run into someone that you did sleep with the night before, you're able to talk to them as though you're still friends. There can be that romantic level to it, but we are in a sense sexually liberated.
It's easy to scrutinize us. We kind of have this window into our lifestyles because we have all of these new media ways for people to look at and see kind of what we're doing.
You're an atheist?
I am definitely an atheist, yes.
Now, why are you an atheist?
Why am I an atheist? Because there is no God.
Atheism assumes that you can disprove the existence of a God. Agnostic is a more correct term, but I'm an atheist.
Are you an atheist?
Yeah.
I am an atheist, yeah.
I am, yes.
I am.
So you're not an atheist?
No, I'm not.
So you're leaning that way because of evolution?
Yeah.
I don't believe in there's a guy in the sky that lives in
Police say the young gunman in Kentucky opened fire on classmates inside the school. 14 people were shot this morning. At least 2 of them died.
Bryson Conkright found himself right next to the shooter. His right hand was grazed by a bullet.
When he came in, did he say anything? Did you hear him?
He was lifeless. He just pulled out the gun, didn't think twice, and just did it.
This isn't just the 11th American school shooting since January 1st. It's also the 50th this academic school year.
I think we've become desensitized to these school shootings. They happen far more often, and as a result, I think people just aren't as horrified.
Over the years, a steady stream of gunfire in cities now known by just their first name.
School shooting. Shooting in a school.
Another school shooting.
From Columbine to Blacksburg, Marysville, Washington, Roseburg, Oregon, and Rancho Tehama Reserve, California.
It used to be if there was any school shooting, it was the lead story for days, and people would be obsessed. How did this happen?
This is being imposed on the nation. Are you okay with people going into our schools and telling our little boys they might be girls and our little girls they might be boys? Are you okay with that?
I believe you're going to see an explosion in homeschools. If this prevails, parents are going to look for private schools. Parents are not going to send their 14-year-old daughters into the shower to the bathroom with 14-year-old boys. It's not going to happen. This has everything to do with keeping the federal government out of local issues.
This is an incredible overreach by the Obama administration, like none that we have ever seen.
School districts are being told they must allow transgender students to use the bathroom they identify with, not the gender listed on their birth certificate.
That directive came down today from the Obama administration.
For example, someone who was born a boy but identifies as a girl would be able to use the girls' restroom.
Every public school in the country must let transgender students use bathrooms and locker rooms that match their current gender identity.
Now, tonight, schools are looking very closely over this joint letter from the Department of Education and the Department of Justice because it really could have a big impact when it comes to money.
Why can't parents and the public have input on this policy?
When we err on the side of fear, we amplify hysteria.
The issue had already boiled over in Fort Worth after the state's 5th largest school district said it would enforce a policy which includes letting transgender students choose the restroom they use, regardless of their gender at birth.
Taxpayers and parents should be outraged at this shocking violation and breach of the public trust. Get back to education, repeal the policy. Public schools that do not comply risk losing federal aid.
The directive brought a defiant response from leaders here in Texas.
Democracy.
In Fort Worth, the new federal guidelines seem to intensify the debate rather than settle it.
Idaho Governor Butch Otter released a statement saying in part, threatening to withhold federal Title IX funding for failure to comply with this offensive attempt at social engineering only harms our children. It is unwarranted, unprecedented, and unacceptable.
Specific terms. And society is going in a completely different direction.
There's a passage that's been on my heart the last couple of months. It's 2 Timothy 3, in talking about this world that we live in right now. But it's an interesting passage because he starts off, Paul tells Timothy, understand this.
But it'll start, know this. Paul said, this is need to know information. This isn't just kind of like casual information.
And then he says this in verse 2, for people will be lovers of self.
It's not for nothing that Webster's officially added the word selfie to the dictionary this year.
Why? Perhaps because narcissism has become completely intertwined with the fabric of our society.
Oxford estimates use of the word in the past year has increased 17,000%.
The crazy thing about this list is many of these things we read, and nowadays we just kind of shrug our shoulders at it.
The current version of the DSM defines narcissism as intense self-absorption and a grandiose sense of self. Sounds familiar.
Because the emotional dynamics of billions of people is going to shift to an increase of evil and selfishness. So he's talking about the emotional dynamics of the planet.
I grew up in something often called Generation Me, but when I look at the current world, I can't remember why that fit us. This is Generation Me, or maybe Generation Look at Me.
And it's become so normal to us. I mean, I was reading this thing about the sociologists are saying that our culture, this generation, is by far, by a long shot, the most narcissistic culture to ever exist.
It seems that has become part of the zeitgeist. The idea that everyone deserves a camera crew or a microphone to broadcast everything about them.
Everyone thinking, I have the opinion that's going to change. We think that's normal.
We have Twitter, Facebook, MySpace, Foursquare, and myriad blogging tools that are built to allow us to tell the world everything we're thinking, as if every thought we have should be shared.
You understand, back then they'd be like, you gotta be kidding me. Everyone is gonna think that their voice should be heard, and everyone is gonna build this shrine to themselves so that everyone else can see and make themselves look as good as possible. It's normal.
That's what Paul is describing here.
What do you want to believe? What's your pleasure? What would you like? I'll find you a teacher to give you that. But Paul tells Timothy, don't you be one of those guys. You know what this book says. You preach it. You lay it out there. Now's the time to stay the course. Now this time is to stay strong, because the time's coming. People are going to be lovers of themselves, lovers of pleasure, not lovers of God.
To implant chips like these in the hands of volunteers among its workforce.
It is vying to become the first company in the US to microchip employees.
The summit's right out of 1984, but Jamie Yuccas found willing workers in 2017.
Do you think this is the future?
It is the future.
You don't get one side without the other. When there's a new tool, it can be used for good or evil.
You know, what the employees who have signed up say, it's just convenient. You know, the idea is you just wave your hand.
And designed to replace the traditional keypad for opening doors, using the copier, even buying food in the cafeteria.
To be able to purchase it. But what if there was a way that you wouldn't have to do any of that?
It sounds a bit like a plot point in a dystopian novel.
Right.
That whole, I know it's very futuristic, I get it, but I think what's wrong with just taking out your card? But good for them.
I think it's the wave of the future that we'll all have implanted chips that have our medical records.
The question now is what do we do from here? And the answer, I think, is that we do what we are doing here now. We talk to each other, we try and figure out how to get other people to talk about it, and we try and get society at large to recognize that this is a critical issue. Now there's, I think, a really critical timeline on all of this. Right now, only about 1/3 of the planet is online. So that's us and a few other people. The remaining 2/3, however, are coming online in the next 5 to 15 years.
The extreme heat is gripping other parts of the country, with Sydney today breaking its hottest summer on record.
17 records tumbled.
Perth also set a cold weather record. Yesterday was the coolest February day since records began.
Never seen it ever like this before.
South Australia has been rattled by yet another earthquake. It follows 2 other tremors of similar magnitude.
And so storm after storm after storm has been moving into California.
Dude, this is so gnarly. Heavy downpours.
Well, what is causing this unusual winter pattern, Jeff?
2 cars were swallowed up by a massive sinkhole.
I've never seen anything like this before.
So no one knows exactly for sure. There's always natural variability, but this has been an unusual winter.
It's been dubbed Lucifer.
Maybe once in every 10-year event.
The world in some way has to digest this tremendous speed of change, complexity of change.
This is happening. This is real. This is happening right now.
And so much of the behavior that I see is globalized behavior. It's not just behavior in any one part of the world. We have to let go of that arrogance and embrace the tolerance of true globalization.
Last month was the 3rd warmest January on record.
And this is the first time in the history of the record that 3 years in a row were successfully each hotter than the previous.
The USGS says the 2016 El Nino generated the highest sea levels and the largest wave energy they've ever recorded.
Coastal erosion is at historic levels.
Sea level rise is accelerating. It's going to accelerate even faster than it already has.
It doesn't look anything like it has in the past, but this is very unusual.
Has faced attacks 4 days in a row this past week.
A provocative move from North Korea overnight.
This comes after South Korea said the North fired a projectile into the water near Japan.
But from around 2011, we have seen a spike in the numbers of deadly conflicts.
Police brutality has once again created waves of unrest in France.
The rise of uncertainty, we see it in the US, we see it in Brexit, we see it around the world.
So to conclude, we're now for global governance.
Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg positioning himself to be the self-appointed face of globalism. The social media giant penning a near 6,000 word manifesto rather. Mark Zuckerberg is taking it upon himself to more or less say, hey, listen, we need a one world, sort of a one world situation.
It's no longer the case where a country can secure their things and leave other countries vulnerable. Because we're all using the same stuff. We're all using the same cell phones, the same computers, same operating systems, the same internet.
Here's what he wants to do. He says he wants to develop a social infrastructure to give people the power to build a global community that works for all of us. I mean, some ominous things in there on the surface, but you could read into it and see some ominous things.
Well, the devil's in the details.
But technology is ubiquitous, and the pace of change is so rapid.
Myself having been trained as a computer scientist in the 90s, everybody knew AI didn't work. It's not like, people tried it. They tried neural nets. None of them worked out. And fast forward a few years, and now Brain probably touches every single one of our main projects, ranging, from search to photos to ads to everything we do.
And there are mental technologies, cognitive technologies that let us upgrade our brains so we can keep pace in an exponential world.
It's an incredible time.
The really important point is it's not stopping. 9 years from today, the average $1,000 laptop is going to have the same computing power as the human brain.
Now, it might seem weird to sort of connect technology and neuroscience. If we understand the algorithms of the brain, can we think about running that on hardware, other hardware that we have, silicon hardware? And this is a quiet revolution that's happening right now.
Sometimes what happens is a scientist can get so engrossed in their work, they don't necessarily realize the ramifications of what they're doing.
Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains?
The human brain was not designed to move at this speed and to think at this scale. It was designed in a very different time for a very different environment. But here too, there are upgrades available. And how to upgrade our brain is where I spend the bulk of my time.
State lawmakers are considering a bill that would ban microchips from being implanted in people. Similar microchips are currently used to track merchandise, find lost pets, and make credit card purchases.
The world's leaders are getting together talking about this. Klaus Schwab, the CEO of Davos, he called the time we're living in the fourth industrial revolution. He said there's never been a time of greater promise or greater peril.
And of course, this has caused a tectonic shift in the field. So there's been massive investment by industry into this field. Billions of dollars from the likes of Google and Apple and Baidu.
Biotechnology is a great example. Biotechnology is now accelerating so fast it is moving at 5 times the speed of Moore's Law. It is doubling in power every 4 months.
This is going to be a sort of unusual epic journey that a brain is going to take. So we start not with humans, but with rats. And the final resting place of this animal's brain then at Harvard is this. This is a 2 petabyte storage array. So this is a bunch of hard drives. We're storing what's remains of this animal's brain in digital form there.
Now, Republican State Senator Becky Harris is worried they could someday end up in humans.
And we upload that animal's brain to the cloud. You know, this idea of brain uploading is sort of captured a little bit of the sort of popular imagination. So, you know, Time and Focus and the magazines have started to sort of latch onto this issue. What if we could upload our brain? Maybe that's a path to immortality.
The ACLU says there is no urgent need to protect humans, but they agree the technology would violate privacy rights and raise serious concerns.
State senators like Nathan Dahm question Real ID's intentions.
So does that mean that our personal information, biometric data, can be shared indirectly with the federal government?
And this lets governments get away with a level of surveillance we might never allow otherwise.
That the gravitational forces, the laws of entropy, and all of these things that are the natural forces of our world are no longer the governing rules. That's why when people worship the laws of nature and they talk about Mother Nature,
that pure drive to understand and grasp how the universe works. And the deeper you want to go to probe the microscopic realm, the bigger the machine that you need. And of course, I think as many of you are familiar, the state of the art of this is right here. Large Hadron Collider, Geneva, Switzerland. This is sort of the modern day pyramids, right? This is the most complex piece of machinery that our species has ever created. It's a 27-kilometer long tunnel where particles are accelerated to near the speed of light and then they smash into each other.
It's here, yeah, but it's temporary. It's not forever. There's a new heaven, a new earth with a new reality that has a nature that is beyond anything that we can know or understand. It's that reality that Jesus left to come into this earth and submit himself to the incredible limitations of the world in which we live in.
Meanwhile, potentially dangerous storms are pushing through the south and heading towards the northeast, while a second round of severe weather heads for Texas. Hail the size of baseballs pounded parts of Texas and Arkansas yesterday, damaging many cars, homes, buildings. Meteorologist Lisa Vegas from our Dallas-Fort Worth station.
Speed of change, complexity of change.
This is happening. This is real. This is happening right now.
And so much of the behavior that I see is globalized behavior. It's not just behavior in any one part of the world. We have to let go of that arrogance and embrace the tolerance of true globalization.
Last month was the third warmest January on record.
And this is the first time in the history of the record that 3 years in a row were successfully each hotter than the previous.
The USGS says the 2016 El Nino generated the highest sea levels and the largest wave energy they've ever recorded.
Coastal erosion is at historic levels.
Sea level rise is accelerating. It's going to accelerate even faster than it already has.
It doesn't look anything like it has in the past.
Where Los Angeles is dealing with the biggest wildfire in the city's history.
Hundreds of residents are being forced to evacuate their homes.
California's governor has declared a state of emergency with several other large wildfires burning on the state's west coast.
The western U.S. is being hit by another type of natural disaster, wildfire.
The sheer numbers are staggering. 100 fires in total, around 80 of them considered large.
In 9 western states. Did you get that? 75 fires in 9.
Can you also talk about, last week saw virtually unprecedented floods across South Asia.
The Eagle Creek fire has charred some 30,000 acres in the heart of Oregon's scenic Columbia River Gorge.
Jennifer, it's hard to wrap your head around this. Again, really hard to find the words to describe this. We're talking about this luscious, pristine green gorge now turning orange and red, billowing black smoke.
It's like nothing I've ever, really ever seen.
I knew there was fires going on, but I didn't think it was going to be as bad as it is right now. I didn't realize the whole town was going to be shut down, which is kind of spooky.
That glowing smoke just rolling and billowing into the sky.
I haven't seen one this big. I've seen a lot of them, but I've not seen one this big.
Here on this side, it is literally
And it really is even just hard to find the words to describe this. A true hell on earth, almost apocalyptic looking, the glow from those flames.
Altogether, the state's wildfires have scorched more than 1,000 square miles. That's about 1/3 of all the land burning across the United States.
Whether it's the floods down in Houston or Hurricane Irma that's threatening Florida, wildfires across the west, or extreme drought on the plains, we cannot deny that our climate is changing.
We're still struggling to fully comprehend its aftermath.
After one of the heaviest downpours in U.S. history, the storm is generating an amount of rain that would normally be seen only once in more than 1,000 years.
Mother Nature is angry. We've never seen the kind of damage, the biblical flooding.
But the number of natural disasters has nearly quadrupled since 1970.
Harvey hit Texas with Old Testament wrath, a deluge along the state's Gulf Coast.
First of all, we've never seen 2 Category 4 plus, that would be Harvey at 4 and Irma at 5, smote into the United States of America in 1 year.
So that's enough energy that it pulled the ocean out from the land.
And it was like that for almost half a day.
Dogs playing where it's normally feet deep.
This is normally entirely underwater.
This video from the Bahamas went viral, showing a normally sapphire sea gone
as far as the eye can see.
This has been a once-in-a-lifetime tidal event.
The force of the approaching hurricane is so strong that despite all this ocean spray, it's actually sucked a lot of the water out of Sarasota
This was
Bay.
the headline in Barbuta's main newspaper today, Destruction Unreal. This was Barbuda before Irma hit, as you can see, just lovely. This is Barbuda today. The Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda says that Barbuda is now barely habitable.
And last year alone, 24.2 million people were displaced by sudden onset disasters, 3 times as many as by conflict and violence.
Hard as it is to believe, another hurricane is heading right toward Barbuda right now. Hurricane Jose, it's currently
Another news this morning, Mexico has been dealt with a deadly 1-2 punch, with Hurricane Katia making landfall overnight as a Category 1 storm on the eastern Gulf Coast, one day after an 8.1 earthquake struck the country's southern Pacific.
Shows how the earthquake caused violent shaking inside an office building. Mexico's president.
I've experienced many earthquakes, but nothing like this.
And just as the hurricane season gears up to batter the other side of the country, the strongest earthquake in modern history may just be the beginning of a very difficult end to 2017.
This is, nature is unleashed. She's drawing all her energy, these hurricanes. 37 consecutive hours of 185 miles per hour. We've never seen anything like that.
Over the past 10 years, we've seen 100-year storms every few years. We've seen hurricanes repeatedly besiege the Gulf and East Coast. Historic droughts are becoming common, and water shortages are routine. Unprecedented disasters are becoming the new normal.
Our first glimpse of the blackened, still smoky crust the fire left on some land here in southern Alberta. The fire started with a lightning strike 2 weeks ago and has since exploded in size.
The yellow, otherworldly haze is because of several large wildfires that are burning in southern Canada and the northern Rockies.
The skies glow orange at night as the flames burn on. Families wake up to ash on their windshields.
Like a sunset almost, evening light in the middle of the day. It was pretty strange.
It was kind of a unique surprise when we woke up today and the sky had this amber glow. Just made everything look a little bit surreal.
People in Oregon and Washington are reporting ash fall from the forest fires on a scale comparable to that what happened when Mount St. Helens erupted.
It's like being in hell, to tell you the truth. It's like being in hell. It's surreal. It seems like the province of British Columbia is burning up right now.
Plastics of all kinds, antibiotics, and artificial fertilizers, etc.
Destruction we are wreaking upon ourselves. First, we grew up fearing that nuclear war between the superpowers would annihilate us all. Today, that threat is far from eliminated.
As J. Robert Oppenheimer, father of the atomic bomb, watched his creation explode over the New Mexico desert, he understood that in that one instant, man's place in the universe had changed.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
They understood what they were doing. They were unleashing a power unlike any humankind had ever had. We now had the ability not just to kill others, but to kill all other human beings.
Man now possessed a power that until then had only been found in the heart of a star.
We were literally taking a piece of the sun and duplicating it on Earth. The power that gives energy to all of the universe, we now had understood and replicated. It's an amazing achievement, but it carried with it tremendous danger, and that is the paradox. Can we control what we've created?
From the start, it was clear that we could not. In the 1950s, the Soviets and the United States built over 20,000 nuclear weapons. By the 1960s, the threat envisioned by Oppenheimer had become a reality.
Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation.
Today, it is the nuclear ambitions of terrorist groups and the intentions of India, Pakistan, Iran, and North Korea that seem to have the world's attention. Though experts say that nuclear proliferation is a huge danger, it is not, they say, the greatest threat to civilization.
Those are not the countries that I would worry about. Those are not the systems I would worry about. They're not the weapons I would worry about. I think the elephant in the room is still the fact that Russia and the U.S. have not stood down from their Cold War launch readiness.
The Russians and the U.S. still have thousands of weapons, many of them ready to launch within 15 minutes or less.
The number of weapons we have is the equivalent of 80,000 Hiroshima bombs. The bomb on Hiroshima killed 100,000 people, and we've got 80,000 of those. We could kill 8 billion people. There are only 6 billion on the planet.
In a world where Russia and the U.S. are at peace, what could set off a nuclear exchange?
There's several ways a nuclear war could start within the next decade or so. The most likely is by accident. A side misinterprets the actions of the other, thinks that they've launched a nuclear attack, and they respond in kind.
The U.S., like Russia, does not have a functioning missile defense system. So if U.S. radar picked up an incoming rocket, we would have only 15 minutes to decide how to respond. The government has run simulations about what might happen under these circumstances.
We've run a lot of exercises on what happens if U.S. forces see an incoming missile, but we've never actually experienced that. In all likelihood, it would go as drilled. The incoming missile would be seen, the president would be notified, and would order a retaliatory strike.
But once they see our missiles going over to strike them, they're likely to send theirs over towards us.
Experts say an exchange of just 20 missiles has the potential to transform the planet.
You set off a large number of nuclear explosions, you were going to put in the atmosphere enough debris to block off the sun's light. This would last for years.
This so-called nuclear winter would feel very much like the aftermath of a supervolcanic eruption or a massive asteroid impact. There is, of course, a crucial difference. This apocalypse is of our own making.
That nuclear sword of Damocles that Kennedy spoke so eloquently about still hangs over our head.
There is a possibility that the human race could go extinct.
up our San Diego skies this morning and our phones in our newsroom as well.
Before the sun was up, Frank Redmond captured this splash of light on his dash cam. Robert Quimby is an astronomy professor at SDSU and the director of the Mount Laguna Observatory. He's never seen anything like it in person and said it was unusually bright.
There's a couple instances when it brightens and then fades and then brightens and fades.
And then it vanished. Quimby said it was likely a space rock ripping through the sky.
There was a bright spot in the sky that had a lot of people talking across the southern part of the state last night. That fireball went streaking across the sky.
Now to new concerns about the Zika virus as athletes prepare for the Olympics in Brazil. Soccer star Hope Solo is speaking out, saying she's so concerned that if she had to make a choice right now, she wouldn't go to Rio.
This morning, the Zika virus crisis now striking fear in some of our nation's top athletes. U.S. soccer star Hope Solo saying if she had to choose whether to go to the Summer Games in Brazil now, she wouldn't go. Solo, who helped her team to World Cup victory in 2015, also saying no athlete competing in Rio should be faced with this dilemma.
Zika virus is a scary thing that is very unknown. Hopefully some of those unknowns will become a little bit more known with the research that they do in the following months.
We're certainly sensitive to the fact that this has become a global issue.
A state of emergency is being issued over dengue fever on the Big Island as the state reported one new case, bringing the total number of cases to 251.
Tonight, investigators believe they're getting closer to finding the source of a salmonella outbreak in Estill County. This comes as more illnesses possibly linked to that outbreak are being reported.
Now to a health scare on a local college campus. 100 students are sick at Ursinus College, and tonight doctors are looking into whether it's food poisoning or a virus.
Well, the medical director tells us that the college has never experienced a stomach virus that's this widespread.
Ursinus College says 7 more students reported feeling sick as part of an outbreak that's brought that Montgomery County campus to a standstill. Now, the first reports came in Tuesday. Ursinus says a handful of faculty and staff have also reported symptoms. The school shut down its dining hall and canceled classes because of the outbreak. They still, though, have not figured out just what is causing this.
At the beginning of February, several small earthquakes have shaken Maine close to the Canadian border, and just today, another earthquake recorded near Rangeley.
Earthquakes are becoming more and more frequent in Kansas, with a 3.9 magnitude quake shaking Oklahoma and Kansas just last month. Now, Derby schools want to be prepared.
Substantial earthquake rattling the Sooner State today. A 3.8 magnitude quake hit near Medford around 2:40 this afternoon, according to the USGS. And it was not alone. 4 other sizable quakes struck today, ranging from 2.6 to 3.5 magnitude. No immediate word of any damage. Oklahoma this year has already had more than 90 earthquakes of magnitude 3.0 or greater.
The village of Macadam in southwest New Brunswick has become the epicenter of what is called earthquake swarms. And it's not the first time people who live around Macadam have felt the vibrations from quakes, but the residents say this most recent swarm is the worst they've ever experienced.
Just like somebody's picking your house up and holding it in the air and dropping it back down.
Others said it was as if a train had exploded through the town, or their home had been hit by an 18-wheel transport truck.
They're like explosions, and they just kept happening.
Tell me what's going on in Macadam. It's quite a mystery there.
And good morning, Heather. That's right, certainly a mystery, and these aren't the kind of earthquakes, or the descriptions of these events aren't the kind of earthquakes that we're used to with the rumbling and the movement. Instead, as you said, residents are saying that they sound like explosions.
I have felt 2 since I've been here today. It's like a vibration stirring under your feet.
Just before 4 o'clock this morning in Taiwan, people were shaken out of bed by a magnitude 6.4 earthquake.
This is video of a deadly 6.4 magnitude earthquake that hit near the southern city of Tainan, Taiwan, Saturday.
From the air, the extent of the damage is clearly visible. 9 buildings in Tainan collapsed, but the damage is especially evident on the ground. Cars crushed. More than 500 now homeless. Seismologists say the earthquake struck close to the surface.
The entire building was just shaking very violently. It was quite loud.
The quake struck just as the Taiwanese were preparing to celebrate one of their biggest holidays, the Lunar New Year. Now it's a nation in mourning.
I felt it this morning, but a 5.1 magnitude earthquake shook homes all across Oklahoma today. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the 5.1 rating makes it the 3rd largest earthquake in state history. Right now, homeowners say that all the shaking is starting to damage their homes.
People who fell as a magnitude 5.7 earthquake hit near Christchurch today. The quake struck shortly after 1 p.m. Pictures have emerged of a cliff face crumbling into the sea at Sumner Beach.
Rough ride for passengers caught in a storm on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship off the coast of North Carolina. And Natalie's here. This is some dramatic video.
It sure does. Hey, guys, good morning. Well, the Weather Service had issued a warning for hurricane force winds, and some passengers say the ship's crew told them about the storm and said they would try to beat it, but conditions were far worse than anyone expected.
New details tonight on the rough day at sea for thousands of people on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship.
That's right. Tonight, a Florida senator is demanding answers, asking why did the ship sail into rough weather in the first place?
When the storm is brewing, you don't go out of port.
Florida Senator Bill Nelson is asking the question many Royal Caribbean passengers have on their minds.
Worst experience? Yeah, only the movies.
But the Anthem of the Seas captain says he didn't realize the magnitude of the storm ahead of time. And he's now defending his decision to set sail with a storm brewing in the Atlantic.
The whole thing was not bigger than this and was up here and it just exploded.
In a video broadcast internally to all 4,500 passenger staterooms Monday, Captain Klaus Anderson, who ordered everyone on board the ship to stay in their rooms, says he's never experienced anything like it.
Honestly, have not seen low pressure that was not forecasted anything near what we actually experienced.
Several viewers were startled this morning by a loud boom that shook their homes. Several calls and messages came into our information center asking us what was going on.
Now, this remains a mystery. I have put in several calls to various state and federal agencies. So far, no one can confirm what this was.
The whole ground was shaken out here. It was a cement out there, and the house was shaken.
Sue Eastman didn't know what was going on. It was just before 10 a.m. when she heard the loud boom.
It was just a short kind of a boom like that, and you could hear everything kind of shake.
As Sue was trying to figure out what happened, so were several others.
I had people from all over, from the lake area here. My neighbors were saying that they felt it, they heard it. People in Morley, up by Everett even. I have family up by Sears, and they heard it up there.
According to the National Weather Service and the U.S. Geological Survey, it was not an earthquake.
It made a rumble, almost like a thunder.
So far, no military bases in Michigan seem to know where the alleged sonic boom came from. According to the Michigan National Guard, there are no planes fast enough based in Michigan that can create a sonic boom. For those who experienced it, it was something they've never felt before.